So our next speaker is Andrew Feinstein. He is a South African author, but currently living in Britain. And he has roots in Austria, so his family fled from Vienna. He has actually roots in Vienna from the Nazi regime, and migrated to South Africa, where he was also active as a member of the South African Parliament for the African National Congress. And he also stood as a candidate in Britain recently, in the recent election, with a pro-Palestinian stance, and we know how effective this was. I don't have the clear numbers, you have to help me with that. Martin tried to look it up. I think it was nearly 19% that you got. So really a huge impact that you could make. And he is working on the impact of the global arms trade. And Andrew, please.
Thank you very much. And first, let me say what a pleasure it is to be here and to commend the organizers of this Congress who have put this together in incredibly difficult circumstances and who have shown not just great commitment, and I know most of them are completely exhausted today, but they've also shown incredible courage. And for that, all of us are very, very grateful. Secondly, it's wonderful to be here with the other panelists and with everybody who is speaking at the conference, and particularly our Palestinian brothers and sisters who are here from various parts of the world where they're now having to live. And finally, it's so great to see so many of you here. I wasn't sure whether we were going to be talking to a handful of people in Vienna. And when I arrived at the venue this morning, I was very, very pleasantly surprised. And what it says to me is that everywhere in the world, including in those countries who are trying to address their own appalling historical legacy by giving uncritical support to the world's first live-streamed genocide, in what Hebb so accurately described as a profound psychosis. It is so important that you here in Austria, like our comrades in Germany, are doing the work and showing the support and speaking truth to power here in Austria. And as was mentioned, my mother grew up in Floridsdorf, where she spent 3.5 years hidden in a coal cellar, which is how she survived the Second World War. But dozens of her family didn't, and were murdered primarily in Auschwitz and a few in Theresienstadt. I've had the great honor of lecturing at Auschwitz on genocide prevention for the Auschwitz Institute, but never in my life did I expect to be witnessing what we are seeing every day in Gaza, the West Bank, and now in Lebanon as well. And I lived under apartheid in South Africa, of course, as a privileged white person. But I got involved in the ANC and our struggle for liberation, which was ultimately a successful struggle against a white, racist, supremacy oligarchy. And we should remember that, of course, there are differences between the South African situation and the Palestinian situation, but there are important similarities. The most important of which are these are both consequences of settler colonialism and of racist white supremacy. And we are seeing the true racism of our own governments in the so-called Western world playing out in what is happening in Palestine and has been happening not just over the last appalling year, but for so many decades already. And I'm very proud to be here as a South African, because it was my country who took Israel to the highest court in the world. And the reason we did that is to show the world, particularly the Western world, that the oppressed are now the lawyers and the judges in our society. That those of us who have overcome racism, who have overcome brutal slaughter, who have overcome oligarchy, are standing in this court to say, we will not tolerate its existence anywhere in the world, regardless of who the perpetrators are. That is the message that South Africa sent to the world. And that is the message that we all need to be sending to the world. Because let us never forget that it was Britain and the United States who described my former boss, Nelson Mandela, as a terrorist. But let us not be surprised by the way in which the mainstream, or more appropriately, the commercial media, covers what is happening in the world today. Let us not be surprised by the attitude of our governments, who are not doing nothing in the face of a genocide. They are not just enabling and facilitating that genocide with our weapons, which are made with our tax euros. They are profiting from the slaughter that we see every day on our screens. How are they doing that? Well, the reality is that the defense companies of Germany, the United Kingdom, the United States, and other countries of the so-called West are the most heavily subsidized companies there have ever been in economic history, subsidized by our money. They are also the most corrupt companies the world has ever seen, accounting for 40% of all corruption in the world. And an enormous amount of that corruption gets fed back into our political systems in the West. So these conflicts from which we are profiting are effectively oiling the wheels, are effectively financing our corrupt, mendacious, racist politics in our own countries. And we should never forget that, because the only way that our countries continue to massively increase their defense budgets year after year after year is by ensuring that these horrific conflicts take place around the world constantly and continuously. And why do the commercial media parrot the nonsense that is spoken by our politicians? You know, I stood for election where I live in my own constituency against a man called Keir Starmer, who once used to be a human rights lawyer, he claimed. He has lost every shred of humanity. He has now become a racist, lying creature of corporations and other vested interests. But let us understand that our media is owned by the very same people who own the arms companies that are so profiting from what we are seeing today, that infuse our politics with corruption. So we shouldn't be surprised that they parrot the nonsense that is spoken by our politicians. And let us, and I'm aware that I don't have very long left, but let us very briefly listen to the voice of our media. When Lebanon is invaded, our media tells us that Israel has sent troops in response to. When civilians are bombed, our media tells us that blasts were heard, people say. When Rafah is destroyed, the media describes it as a limited operation. When aid is blocked, we are told hunger stalks Gaza, as if by some extraordinary mythical power, these people are denied basic nutrition. When apartment buildings are flattened and innumerable civilians slaughtered, our media describes it as a targeted strike. That is the bullshit that we are being sold. And it is our responsibility to call out the bullshit, to speak truth to power in support of our Palestinian brothers and sisters. And finally, and I will talk about this in more detail tomorrow, to see our politicians and the supine media weaponize anti-Semitism to defend the indefensible that the state of Israel is undertaking is, to me, as the son of a Viennese Holocaust survivor, disgusting, reprehensible, and an insult to the memories of the millions, including my mother's extended family, who were slaughtered by the Nazis. And let me conclude by saying that just as we in South Africa, because of the courage of millions of our oppressed people, because of the support of tens of millions of people around the world, just as we won our freedom, so too will Palestine be free. Because, in the words of Nelson Mandela, when he emerged from 27 years in an apartheid jail, what did he say? He said, "Our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinian people."